Good evening, everyone. Hello, I'm Jackie Glover, the Executive Director of the new Black Film Project at the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research, directed by Henry Louis Gates, Jr. We'll be announcing our inaugural class of Black Film Project Fellows in about a month in collaboration with the Department of Art, Film, and Visual Studies. Professor Gates regrets that he can't be with us this evening, but he wants you all to know that he fell in love with this film when he saw it in Martha's Vineyard this summer, and subsequently asked Catherine Gunn to bring it to Harvard. He insisted it had to be at Harvard. We wish to thank the Harvard University Committee on the Arts for inviting us to host this screening as part of Arts Thursday, and also the Carpenter Center for providing us with the perfect space for it. Following the film screening, Sarah Lewis, the John L. Loeb Associate Professor of the Humanities and Associate Professor of African and African American Studies at Harvard University, and the founder of Vision and Justice, will moderate a panel. And now I would like to invite Sarah Lewis to the podium.
What a pleasure to have the extraordinary Jackie Glover here and to have all of you here. Ooh, it feels festive despite the dreary night, and that's because we all know transformative magic really happens in spaces like this, and it will especially tonight. The vision of a dear friend and colleague is in large part why we're here to celebrate, and I have the pleasure of introducing her, Catherine Gunn. She is the founder and director of Aubin Pictures, the Emmy Award nominated and Academy shortlisted producer, director, writer, and activist. Her media work really focuses on issues that I know many of this room work on, care about deeply: racial, reproductive, and environmental justice, just to name a few of the topics that animate her work. Her films have been screened all around the world in theaters, museums, festivals, and schools, all sorts of streaming platforms, as you know. She serves on many boards that focus on arts, media, and justice. She is an alum of an extraordinary university down the road, Brown, and the Whitney Independent Study Program. She has many films to her credit, one of which we're celebrating tonight, of course, Paint Me a Road Out of Here, but one feature for a bio that I cannot omit because it is so important to my own intellectual formation as a professor here is that she is the mother of 4, and one is here at Harvard, Tenzin Gunn, who is an extraordinary, yeah, exactly. You say Tenzin's name and the whole room claps. And that's a testament, too, to the love and care that you, as his mother, provide and that exudes from him. It is just a real pleasure to have you here on campus to celebrate this extraordinary work that she'll speak about a bit more now. So thank you on behalf of Hutchins. Thank you.
Hi, I want to thank Jackie and Sarah, both of whom are old friends by now. Jackie and I actually raised our kids together, 6, if you put them all together. And I want to say thank you for bringing the film and bringing me here. And I want to point out the panel. You will meet Mary Enoch Elizabeth Baxter, in the film, and she is here with us tonight, and Yara Shahidi, who is an alum of this illustrious other, you're down the street from Brown, of this university, and we will get to have, and Yara is also an executive producer of the film, which I have to say is one of the most important roles when you're a documentary filmmaker like me for almost 43 years. I was 1 when I started. But you know, it's hard to make these things. It's important to me that you're here in the room with us, that you're able to watch a film together, and that, you know, I think it's so important for us these days to come into spaces and share spaces with each other when actually doing that is a rebellion, when being together is resisting and refuting the current I don't want to call them the government, but the current scenario that we wake up to every morning and have to deal with all day, every day now. So I really appreciate that you're here. I appreciate that Yara's here and that Mary's here and that Sarah's going to join us on the panel. So I hope you'll stay afterwards because we love hearing what people think and what it makes them question. Thank you.
It's such a privilege to have the chance to think through this extraordinary film with the director and an executive producer, and of course the subject in this film, Mary Enoch Elizabeth Baxter. I'd like to, if you just allow me, to offer a more robust introduction than I could do at the start of the film before we have a conversation together. And we were going to allow for time for questions from the audience to start to think through what you might like to say as a question, maybe a short comment, but as a question. And here, we'll have some time to really dive in. I want to do what I was hoping to at the start and first offer the introduction and salute to one of the executive producers, who is, in fact, one of my former students, Yara Shahidi. This is rare, as a professor, you're always learning from your students. When you teach about the intersection and power of art for justice, it's quite unique to have in front of you a student who is transforming the landscape as you speak and who is the subject on which you could also teach. So she is my muse in many ways. I'm deeply inspired by her work, and I will just let you know that you might know her as, of course, an actress, and from Blackish to Grownish, but beyond the screen, she really is this proud member of the class of 2022, and was a concentrator in my department, African and African American Studies. Her journey really began with the work of the Hutchins Center in 2013. When her cousin Naz encouraged a visit to come here to Harvard, and she met with a colleague who regrets that he couldn't be here tonight, and Henry Louis Gates Jr., and Larry Bobo, Jamaica Kincaid, whose office I currently occupy, which is surreal every day, as she's recently retired. Her mentors, along with Marcelina Morgan, who fuel her intellectual curiosity and passion for storytelling. Among her many accomplishments, I just want to salute three, because I see many students in the room, to ensure you have models for the kind of work you can do. At 18, she founded 18th by 18th, We Vote Next, which mobilized Gen Z and voters who are people of color in political activism. At 20, she and her mother, Yara Shahidi, who's also an executive producer on this film, launched Seventh Son Productions, which is dedicated to storytelling that bridges entertainment and social change. And these principles are evident in the final initiative I want to salute, the Optimist Project podcast on Sirius XM, which amplifies conversations that explore purpose-driven passions and optimism. Today, as you know, she's the executive director of Paint Me a Road, and they, Carrie and Yara, continue to use art as a force for impact. I'm so grateful she is here. Thank you. Thank you for coming back to home. It is a true honor to be able to be in conversation with Mary Enoch Elizabeth Baxter. There she is. Woo! Yes, yes. You need no introduction, but I'd like to offer you your flowers and accolades still, if I may. Because you are an award-winning, multidisciplinary artist and a writer and pedagogue and a cultural worker based in my parents' hometown of Philadelphia, PA. You are a visionary thought leader, creating socially conscious films, performances, music, visual art, and I look forward to talking to you more about the extent of your practice, as we will here today. I want to make sure everyone knows that you've been widely exhibited. Your work has been in international venues, local ones as well, MoMA, PS1, Frieze LA, the Brooklyn Museum, many others. Mary's received numerous prestigious awards, including the Soros Justice Fellowship, many others. And on February 2nd, 2024, she received the governor's pardon from Josh Shapiro and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which is an honor to her transformative work in the arts and culture sector and her 17-year commitment to communal healing activism, and repair. So I want to invite my three guests here to join me on the panel, and we'll have a great conversation about the film. This is a film in which we have to begin by saluting the spirit who's with us all and the extraordinary visionary Faith Ringgold. And it's often said that it's a film about a painting, but really it's about what a work of art can do in the world to transform narratives that define who counts and who belongs in society. And through this focus on Faith Ringgold, the possibility she offers us as a model, we have received a vehicle for understanding the power of your work, Mary. So I wonder if you might reflect on maybe the first moment in which you began thinking about transforming carceral spaces through art, through narrative, and even through affirmation.
I guess because, as a child, I had already interfaced with these systems of control. It's not captured in the film, but at age 12, I was in a stolen car. It crashed, and I woke up handcuffed to a hospital bed. And it was because the police officers and the hospital staff thought that I was an adult, and I was 12 years old. So very early on, I felt the brunt of adultification bias, which is, the hyper-criminalization, but also sexualization of Black children in the ways in which they're denied, a childhood. So very early on, I turned to poetry and drawing initially to try to, create my own world and reimagine myself outside of those harmful systems.
And I'd like to ask Kat and Yara together, how do you see the work of a film that salutes Mary, that salutes Faith Ringgold, that thinks through these spaces as a vehicle for potentially policy change?
Considering that you are the true usher, I have to point to you first.
There's too many things to say, and I don't want to talk for a long time. But, you could talk a little bit about the impact work that Aubin Pictures, our nonprofit, does, is committed to really doing the activism and the connection, the engagement with community, the change, whether it's education or healing, legislative change, narrative change. We start working on that stuff before we even start the films. And the Dignity for Women Act, which is referenced in the film, still only exists in about half the states. And even in some of those, it's not enforced. So this is a good vehicle to educate about that and to get people motivated and inspired to understand what's happening and to fight for a change around that. Obviously, there's also an issue around Rikers Island closing, and this film is important for that. I mean, there's some other examples, but I do think that films can make all kinds of difference.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm grateful to have had, my foray onto television be through Blackish, which was a show that prided itself on figuring out how to make impact. And I think for me as an actor, so many times impact in film and television can feel really abstract. And it was moments like in Blackish's closing that we helped in the passing of Juneteenth as a federal holiday. And there were certain direct connections to that in which I got to see firsthand how policy change is made. And the only reason I bring that up is that's scripted, fictionalized filmmaking. And I think documentary filmmaking holds a whole other power because you were so gracious as to let us into your whole world behind not only what we can see in exhibits and not only what we can look up. And I think that provides a whole other level of impact. I know for me, so much of my really coming into my own space as somebody that's socially engaged happened through documentaries. It happened through sitting in the Schomburg, and my graduation present was hearing Raoul Peck speak about I'm Not Your Negro in the Schomburg Center. And I remember how that opened up my eyes to so many things, and sitting in the Hutchins Center and looking at the Buford Delaney painting of Baldwin. All of those moments were so directly impactful to me. And so I think I can attest as an audience member and then hopefully attest as a producer to the impact of just even what happened when both myself and my fabulous co-producer, Yara Shahidi, who I happen to be related to, just like the reason why this was such a no-brainer was because we were audience members that were impacted by sitting down and watching your story, watching the work. And we hope that it's a shared experience for so many people.
You know, I want to reflect on the power of narrative because I ask about this as a vehicle for policy, and it underscores, I think, the work that we have as in the art space to always make a case for, you know, the power of culture. And so one way to do it is to demonstrate impact, right? It can change this, it can change, but really, I think what animates all of us here is our understanding of how it can impact the narratives that define who feels that their dreams are possible, right? So I'd love for us all to think that through, but there was a moment in the film, Mary, when you were talking about affirmations and the narratives that you wanted to ensure were on the walls. I wanted to know if you might speak to us more about how affirmations came to you as an idea, and I'll ask you a bit more after.
Well, first and foremost, it's something that I have in practice in my own life. It's been very instrumental in my own healing. Not only, you know, setting the tone for the day, but also for the projects that I engage, the people I come across, and the communities that I'm in conversation with through my work and my art and practice. So affirmations, they're also spiritual. It's a way where I can sit and meditate and, you know, push the trauma aside and envision my boldest, brightest, most beautiful future.
At the end of this conversation, I'm going to ask for an affirmation that you want us all to leave with. So I'm going to seed that now to give you time to think that through. I'm also just, as Yara likely knows, mindful whenever I'm in Boston and thinking about the foundations of a conversation like this, because the roots really go back to Frederick Douglass, right, who would anticipate that we would be thinking about bondage and oppression in all of its forms through the power of culture, through the power of photography, film, to transform our belief in who matters and who counts. He gave a speech here in Boston's Tremont Temple about this idea, Pictures in Progress, and it was not understood, discovered, written about until 10 years ago in the Library of Congress. But he spent time redrafting 3 times that speech and said it might take over 150 years for people to come along and better explain, quite humbly, you know, what I mean about the force of images for justice. And I'm here, you know, with those who I know he had in mind. So in thinking about the impact of the film, how does it allow you to think through the function today of documentary practice and art making for justice?
To me, this is a parable, and it's a really simple example of a narrative changing cultural ideas. And we did that on purpose because the point wasn't just to get the painting out, it's to get the women out. But we use this artistic platform, both the film and the painting, to tell a story that can then be applied directly to the women. And there's 5, but now that we've been showing the film, I've added another. But there's 5 things that we identified as how we got the painting out. And I think they can be applied to abolition, to utopia, to whatever it is that drives you to something more just or some kind of change. And I think it's really settling today for people differently. And those are accountability, because the commissioner took responsibility where everyone else was saying, it's not my job, it's not my job. Community, where you saw the artists and the activists and the philanthropists and the government and the Correction Institute all working together. And they really, we cannot move forward on anything any of us want to do unless we really allow everyone to have their role and to be a part of it and to work together. There's a plan, which sometimes I think we talk about imagining something and not really thinking about how you get there from here. And the plan for the painting was that it had been exhibited at the Brooklyn Museum before. They knew how to keep it temperature controlled and how to ensure it and how to make sure that it was accessible for the public to see. So they knew that that was where it should be. There was also value, that when they realized that painting wasn't something you just paint over, but was worth at least $10 million, that they started treating it differently. And if people valued, especially the people in control of the facilities and the system, valued the people inside, the women and gender expansive people inside, they wouldn't treat them the way they do. They wouldn't be able to hold them the way they do. They would have to figure out ways that made more sense to somebody, that mattered, more sense to be able to give people supports, to be able to give people food and shelter and work and drug treatment and mental health care and things like that. Don't tell me, what is it? And urgency. With the painting, we only had 2 weeks. And instead of saying, someday we'll close Rikers, we need to say, you've got 6 months or a year or something like that to figure out. And it created an urgency that actually made it happen. The one that I've added since we started showing the film is vision, which is hope, right? That you have to imagine, like any artist, any activist, somebody who's imagining something that doesn't exist and working to make it that. Either painting a blank canvas, not painting over a canvas, but Faith painting a blank canvas, or writing a book, or making a movie, or, ending an unjust jail facility, or, something, whatever it is that you have to believe it can be. You can't just say, okay, I'm giving up. We live here and that's it. We all have to believe there's something else. And actually, there was a really beautiful part in one of your podcasts about optimism, and somebody who was on was talking about bringing the seeds. And it's a longer story, which Yara can go into as well. But the idea, I think, is that we do come with a vision. We come with something that can grow, something that is part of the future, even if it's not part of the present in the same way.
No, absolutely. And that you referenced was our interview with Ari Shapiro, but I think the concept that he introduced was something that I learned here at Harvard, and something I learned in your class. But it was the idea that so many times, so many of our community and so many of our peoples who have been oppressed were the first futurists, the first people that had to believe and invest so deeply in a future that was not apparent, was not seen. It's why it's a year that's featured in the documentary, but it's a year that's tattooed on my body, 1963, which is really a testament to people who invested in a vision of life that was not apparent, but they knew was of the utmost importance to pursue. And I think, to your earlier question, something, you've been such a conduit to so much of the knowledge that I then go reshare with anybody who will listen. But when I was sitting in your Vision and Justice conference in my freshman year, it was Brian Stevenson who talks about proximity. And I feel like that's so much of the great work that you two are doing and that we're grateful to be a part of, because so many times, even some of the most liberal spaces and centers can be the most distant from people who are actually oppressed, from people who are actually struggling. I know even in LA, the way the city is set up is quite literally to create distance, to make sure that we never cross paths. And it really does a disservice, because it means that where so many of our passionate people are centered, we're not actually sharing space and community together. And even the idea of advocacy work, we're told to speak on behalf of versus speaking with. And I think this is a way of introducing how to converse with people, how to grow with people, and how to be a part of a movement.
One of the, I should also mention the Vision and Justice convening. We're having another in October, this is the first time even telling Yara about this. But we can't have it without Yara, so I hope she can come.
I'm going to be there, whether you like it or not, I will be there.
So Sherilyn Eiffel and I are co-hosting it at Ford, October 6th
Do you
and 7th.
all understand how big of a deal this is?
And Kat, I just told a minute ago, but that convening allowed us to salute the work of Brian Stevenson, who, if you haven't been to Montgomery to see the Equal Justice Initiative National Memorial to Peace and Justice, you must, before you leave the planet. You must, truly. And it's deliberately not in DC. But you're able to think through the legacy of slavery, the dehumanization of the gays that's led to the carceral system, but through the vantage point of seeing how we haven't honored the men and women whose lives were unjustly taken through extrajudicial lynching, racial terror, over 4,000. And so his idea, this pillar he has of thinking through the need to be proximate to injustice is exactly right, Yara. And I just do want to add, since actually teaching you in that course, I started teaching at the Yale, because Harvard doesn't have one, but Yale Prison Initiative. And I went to Yale too, and Harvard needs to have one, and a max security prison for men. And I had the most transformative possible, I think, experience in the classroom, because you're met with this question of how well you care for your freedom. And I taught the same material in that classroom that I do here. And so I've continued to go back, but it made me think about the nature of what it really means to be free, And the best, I think, way to demonstrate the choices that we make with that freedom is through what we leave legible through the creative process, through films, through artwork of all kinds. So one of the most moving, for me, parts of the film was seeing how makers in different conditions, Mickalene Thomas, non-incarcerated artists, right? Artists, and you were having a conversation about freedom, what it means to create. And I wanted to ask you, Mary, about narrative and the other stories you're bringing with you as you share your own. Do you remember when she was saying to you, the work of the artist is not just to share your own story, but that of others? I just wonder how this film being out and how your work being out has let you think about these conversations within these spaces.
I guess a really good example of that is with my ongoing series, Consecration to Mary. And it was really through mining my previous work, Ain't I a Woman, and looking at some of the root causes of incarceration, and I was able to make those connections with adultification bias. And it's like super violent, overtly sexualized photograph of this young girl. And, I was working at Mural Arts Philadelphia, which is based in Philly, and it is the home and home studio, actually, of the artist Thomas Akins. And while working there, I had no idea of this history. It was during COVID, 90% of the staff were working from home. And I just had a lot of, time and just intimate space, proximity in the building, and decided to do some research on the artist, of where I work at, his home and home studio. And that's when I discovered that he had taken, some of the probably first images of child pornography. And it was right in that moment, me having the experience of being a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, it gave me the language to not only talk about my story, but then to connect it with this longer history. And reimagine those moments as they should have been, safe and protected, make this critical intervention in the archive where I could restore dignity to this young unnamed girl who hadn't received it in life. So I do look at this work also in the lens of Afrofuturism, because I'm time traveling to get to her. And I just think that it's just a mythology that we can continue to use to talk about these stories in a way that doesn't re-traumatize, but offers healing and ultimately liberation.
Before we open for questions, I think it's around that time, if my sense of time is right. I wanted to know from really all of you, but I'll ask Yara and Kat first, if the impact of this work, because you yourself, Yara, and Carrie, you were both moved to be involved because of its impact. The impact of this has inspired new ways of thinking about upcoming projects for the both of you, and then Mary.
Yeah, well, I think for us, this project was really a reaffirmation. So many times, we started Seventh Son, again, very much a project of sitting and a product of sitting in class. I was sitting in class with Professor West, and he was going through Souls of Black Folk and talked about Black people being the seventh son, S-O-N, and I think that's when I called Mommy, I have the name, because we had a nameless production company at the time. We were just doing the work, untitled. But for us, my mother, the reason why our partnership works is because she's always been intentional about media consumption from a young age, well before us being in it. And so she created what I'd consider almost an alternate syllabus of what my brothers and I would read and consume. And so because of that, I think my place in the world was so much more sound, because I thought that's what the world was. I thought it looked like all of us. I thought it had all of us in mind. And I think it was because everything I read, everything I consumed was a reflection of my culture, my peers' cultures, and most importantly, it was about us living our whole life. It wasn't just stories that we're used to seeing. And so because of that, we're a household of family members that really only watch TV on the weekends. And I think Blackish was the first time I watched TV during the week ever in my life. And I give you all of that preamble just to say, Seventh Son came from a real point of passion for both of us to say, how can we continue to provide the space that she gave me, which was to dream our biggest dreams and to tell stories of our global communities. And I think that work is always easier said than done. As producers, we're able to make it happen through contracts and technical things, which is a beautiful space, something you don't always get to do as an actor, but the opportunities are still few and far between to really see a piece of work that represents what drives you and excites you about media in the first place. And so I'd have to say this was such a perfectly timed convening, because, you know, it's always a point of getting extra inspired when you see somebody that's in a shared mission with you. And so, yeah, I would have to say it's a real reaffirmation. And I think it continues to tell us that we're on the right path, not only in how this is received, but just the personal inspiration of the conversations it started for all of us.
Thank you. Beautiful. Yes.
I'll pick up right there. And it's interesting because you just used the word affirmation. I would say affirmation too, that when you and your mom watched it and came back, it was immediate. And it made us feel like what we were thinking and doing and spending all this time on was making sense. And I think the way it affects me going forward is really just still, I mean, my kids used to laugh, like we'd get to credits, they'd be like, really, 200 people worked on this film? And I was like, yeah, you know, that it's really, I like to make things with people. That's how I communicate and relate to people. And I want to keep figuring out how to do that the most effectively. And Mary and I really hammered out, at least for me, some very new ways of working together on a documentary. And I'll say there's another Harvard student here, Mariah Norman, who I'm working on a short documentary with now. And it's a similar experience of sort of how do we use the power of whether we're on camera, behind the camera, or both, or how do we relate to each other in such a powerful medium where all of a sudden this is way out of all three of our hands. It now, and especially obviously for Mary, but it exists as a story that isn't ours anymore in some ways. And I want to be very mindful and careful about how I do that and how I encourage other people to do that.
We're living in an era, I want to say, politically, I think that really requires that we're attentive to the facts and are very clear about how we deliver these facts in ways that make them inviolate, incapable of being erased, you know, censored, excised, and the impact of a film like this and in an era like this can't be understated. Yeah. Did you want
Can I say one thing about that, which is obviously that I think for a lot of people, I have to say I'm always blown away by how few people know Faith and her work. It's horrifying to me. I'll be like, you know, it's a film about Faith Ringgold. And they're like, who's Faith Ringgold? But I do think in addition to her being a revelation for people, it does keep her alive in a way that she wasn't before this film, and there will be others. And I think it's important that I always share that Mary and I got to share the film with her before she passed. So she did see the film.
Beautiful. I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Well, before I ask about what I think are the probably urgently needed affirmations for the day from Mary, I'm going to open up for questions and have you close with that. And I think we have one on the right. We have, okay, several. Great. Thank you, Justin. The mics will come to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this really beautiful film. It was really just incredibly lovely. I have two questions. One is, when did you start making the film, and where was the painting in its potential freedom at the point that you thought to make the film? And then the second is for Mary. In the scene at the end where the formerly incarcerated women from Rikers Island are sort of debating whether the painting or art can and can't make a difference in people's lives, you're listening so intently. And I was just wondering if you would talk a little bit about what you were thinking as you were listening to people kind of reflect on, in a sense, your life's work. And so those are my questions.
Well, yes, I was listening very intently because I understand all of the perspectives that were shared, right? I do believe art can be transformative, right? My life is a testament to that. The art that I particularly created around consecration to Mary became like this advocacy for this campaign for accountability that ultimately led to the photographs being removed from online access. These photographs were the most downloaded in the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts online archive. So that's one way. But I'm also very acutely aware that art can only do but so much, right? That people, they are the ones that need to push for change, right? We talk about institutions and structures, but people animate them. So ultimately, the art can inspire, be a catalyst, but it's ultimately up to the individual to push the needle forward and advocate and get on the front lines, right? We need people that are, at the forefront of policy change. We need people on the streets protesting. We need people to know that they have a role to play and not just, wait for things to happen, right? We need to be the change we want to see.
I was with the group that went to Rikers on December 21st, December 17th, 2021. And it's what people described in there, Helena and Vinny, and it was Omicron, and the place is miserable and horrifying, and it was very cold. And it also happened to be the day that Bell Hooks had died, and it was just an incredibly depressing day. And then somebody said, it'll cheer Kat up if you show her the Faith Ringgold. And then Vinny literally said, what's a Faith Ringgold? And we couldn't find it. We weren't in the women's jail, the Rosies, which is where it was living. But anyway, finally, there was a correction officer who said, oh, yeah, there's a painting. It's down the hall, but, to the left. And it was in a very narrow hallway. And really, the feeling we all had, the literal feeling we had, didn't, take away all pain or anything like that. But there was just a sense of seeing this remarkable testament to somebody's vision 50 years ago that had the potential to change how people feel and think and act. In the same way that the film exists, that painting exists because of that correction officer, Barbara Drummond. And so then I was talking to Faith about, did she want it out? And she said, definitely. And that became sort of the effort. And we realized that she had it out before, but it was really just about the painting. It was like, leave it at the Brooklyn Museum. And that was when we realized that to paint the Women Erode out, we couldn't just move the painting. We needed to keep that process going, that her painting inside a women's jail had gone the limit. There was nothing else it could do in there, especially how it was being treated. And because of what the women say in that last scene, just like it doesn't reflect what's happening now. And that's when we realized that Mary could work with current day, 50 years later, to work on a new art piece or new art pieces. And that was when they said, oh, okay, you can take the painting to the Brooklyn Museum because we'll keep doing this here. And obviously it didn't pan out for all kinds of complicated reasons, or not complicated reasons. But that was when, and I actually thought it would be just this little short, New York Times Op Docs, which doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. I was like, oh, it'll be a quick little film, It's such a New York story. Like, here's this painting, and it'll come out, and Mary will go in, and then it became obviously a much bigger effort that needed more time to be told.
Okay, great. Okay, it's just like, oh no, Justin. This was incredibly powerful, and I want to thank you for sharing this, all of you, for this beautiful vision, and for the vision that your art has. And I've been thinking a lot about epistemicide, or the willful erasure of different cultures, heritage, that kind of thing. This painting illustrates that in real time. It's usually about language. It's usually about song, other intangible heritage, but you've shown us, like what the correctional officer said, sometimes you gotta let people know that you know, which is a beautiful way of saying sometimes you gotta pop out and show folks. And I just...
We do sell T-shirts that say, let people know you know.
Yes.
If you go to our website, because we think it's great too. And what's it say on the back? It's not the art interrupts lazy thinking. That's on our pens, but there's something else on the back. Anyway, sorry.
So as somebody who's in libraries and archives, part of my job is to interrupt that erasure. So, and something you talked a lot about in the film, or the inmates talked a lot about, was erasure. How do we combat that erasure in our everyday life? That's a big question, but yes.
I mean, there was a scene in the film with Michelle Daniel Jones. I believe she collaborated with Deborah Willis on the mural in Philadelphia, Point of Triangulation. And an impetus for that piece is that individuals have the role to play in stigmatizing the formerly incarcerated. So as individuals, that would, I guess, take a whole redoing of how you interface with folks, because a lot of time what folks get is Hollywood, right? They get the violence, they get a lot of spectacle, right? So it's over 2.2 million people incarcerated. We all know somebody, or know somebody that knows somebody that's been incarcerated. So I would say first and foremost, reconnect with them, right? Figure out their needs. It could be a conversation, it could be resources, but tap into their humanity. And I think that's where it starts. Reaching out to the people that you know, and even calling up, your local legislators and advocating for the Dignity for Incarcerated Women Act, right? This is legislation that is geared to ban the shackling of birthing bodies in prison. It's still legal in 26 odd states. We have women who've been killed, children who have been killed during this horrific process. So I think it starts there.
I think to reaffirm your point, one just kind of anecdotal moment I'll share is I remember I was on a panel for the incredible movie Sing Sing that's out with Coleman Domingo, and I was sitting across from the actor Clarence, who has a phenomenal performance and is formerly incarcerated. But the reason I bring this up was that we saw the way in which media had everything to do with what you're saying about focusing on spectacle. Here we have an incredibly astute actor who's formerly incarcerated and studied Shakespeare and all sorts of things. And the way in which, when I would sit and watch his panels, no one stepped beyond his experience as an incarcerated person to ask about the way in which his plethora of experience contributed to this role. And I think the reason I took issue with it was undermining the art that we were seeing, as he is transformed. He's not playing himself. But I think we all, the media in that moment all participated in kind of reducing what we were witnessing and reducing really the extent of his story, of everything he has to offer. And so I bring that up just as the fact of what you're saying, of rather than focusing on spectacle, how do we push ourselves to go further and think about how we hold ourselves to a higher standard when we're consuming people's stories and when we're interfacing with people's stories. And then to your point on archive, the only other thing that comes up is an essay by Sylvia Wynter, incredible academic, called No Humans Involved. And I think the reason I love it so much is it quite directly addresses how academics in particular should be participating in larger cultural movements. I think it's quite easy here. I mean, I'm guilty of it. When I graduated, I read my thesis again, couldn't understand half the words. And so I think guilty here of trying to impress people here, even when doing work that's supposed to impact people outside of this space. And I think that was a really powerful read for me, because she's really holding all of us to account by saying our responsibility, especially if you're activist academics, is to be as proximate as possible, as in conversation as possible, and as accessible as possible to make your work powerful. And of course, there's a time and place for 3-syllable words and everything in between. But I felt like that's a work that I go back to personally when I'm trying to figure out, what is my responsibility in this? What is my role as someone that went to Harvard but said it's for the greater good? And so she's someone I turn to regularly.
Can I just extend a little bit about Winter here?
Please.
Go back to seminar. I love that you brought up Winter on this point about erasure. In terms of this being a public-facing conversation too, I mean, one of the things Winter's really challenging us to do is to see how language extends this process of erasure. So if you think through just No Humans Involved, the acronym to define, I mean, as you well know, right, a crime that involves only Black males, right? That was the acronym in the 1990s. But we still extend that kind of erasure through language. If you think of the way in which the now exonerated 5, who were formerly called the Central Park 5, are still really referred to through a number and through a site, not their names, or Little Rock 9 or Emmanuel 9, or we still have these kind of heuristic devices we use that I see as a form of erasure, even just linguistically, and that's a deprivation of humanity too. So, I mean, Winter's exactly right to call up, and it's one of the ways that what we do here at Harvard can really translate into thinking through practically how we change, how we communicate with each other to honor, all human life, which is the work of the film. We had a few other questions, or many, so let's make sure we get to them. I think you were next. Unless, Kat, you wanted to.
So this question is for Mary. As a multidisciplinary artist, I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about the process of how hip-hop intersects with other artistic practices to think about this project of liberation, not just in terms of its expression, but how it registers in the body.
For everyone. You know what I want to do, I think, in this moment, because of the time, can we aggregate the questions? Can we have 2 together and then take them? Otherwise, we won't get through, I think, the many that I see. So we'll remember this question. We have one back here and one on the right side. Sorry, Justin.
No, you're good.
Athletic.
Back there, all the way back in the aisle.
Back, far left. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Kingsley Shore. Yeah, beautiful.
I'll make it easy because mine isn't a question. I just honestly have to say how phenomenal this was. Like, every part of it is just incredible, and for everything that all of you did to make this happen. The other thing that I thought was just so impactful is just for Mary, the fact that you, despite everything that you went through, had so much love for yourself and you were determined to love yourself. That is incredible, and it's awesome, and it's something that, for me, it's like making me cry right now, because I said that is so powerful for you to, in the face of everything, say, I don't care. I am going to love myself. And that love was so obvious, evident, and it just rang throughout the entire film. And I appreciated that.
Thank you
So much.
We have one more right here.
Dang, I'm sorry. I feel choked up after that last question. So I doodled this real quickly during the film. I hope it makes sense. But so much of this film touched on the importance of location, placement of location, the weight of certain locations over others, of not only getting eyes on an artwork, but the right kinds of eyes at the right time in the right place. The irony of fighting to get artworks in physical places like a prison, and the struggle to then subsequently get them out of relocated, etc., is just inspiring, to say the least. To witness the struggle to get one piece of art and move one thing, in and out is really incredible and really fascinating to watch. So I'm curious to hear if any of you have can speak on any new or unconventional physical spaces that you are excited to engage in and that you see as ripe for hosting a new kind of art exhibition spaces that maybe perhaps one wouldn't expect to find fine art in or carry clear messaging to an audience. Great questions. Sorry if that was long-winded.
No, it's beautiful.
Okay, I guess I'll answer your question first about the role that hip hop plays in my other mediums. I guess the foundational role would be knowledge production, other ways of knowing outside of reading books or what's passed down through the academy, local news, right? Looking at myself as a living archive and my other community members. So I think that's the main key role that hip hop plays in my practice, because that's what I'm literally doing with language when I'm creating these songs, and I see it spill over in all those ways in my visual work, as well as my performance pieces.
Okay.
I'll speak to this one, although I love what you said, of course, about Mary, and one moment in the film, a line in the film that always embodies that for me is when she says, I'm not the worst thing I've ever done, which more and more people are understanding is important. But then she says, and I'm not the worst thing that has ever been done to me. And to me, that's exactly what you're talking about, is that, it's like I'm not giving them another second of my life. They took what they took. I'm going forward. And to your point, I think, I think about Brian Stevenson, for example, who's a lawyer and a writer. He realized, I also need to change the narrative. I need to have an artistic, it's where the sort of place of art and justice come together. And if you go to the memorial, there's a lot of art, but it's also telling you a very powerful, different, important, unique story. And one other example that I love that shows that art can be anywhere, not just on the museum wall, is when there was a artist in residence at the Philly DA's office. And people were like, what's an artist going to do in the DA's office? And his name is James Yahya Huff. And he went in, he was formerly incarcerated too, but he went in and he looked around, and on the wall were all these black and white pencil drawings of people with hoodies on and, in the dark. And he was like, well, I can see why you think what you think and treat people the way you treat them. And he went around and he made these beautiful, you can see them online, colorful portraits of the judge and the lawyers and the formerly incarcerated people, the incarcerated people, the DA, the people, the people who worked at the reception, the cops, and he put them all on the same level, all in the same kind of frame, all with the same treatment. And it completely transformed the environment, the space it was in. It wasn't a museum, and it had an incredible impact.
Yeah, I mean, one of the many critical points that are made in the film comes from Nicole Fleetwood, a scholar whose work I want to ensure is in the room. She was thinking about art in carceral spaces deeply, and she's describing the way in which behavior is encoded and transformed by comparing, penal systems and museums, right, in the film. And so this question about what institutions allow for if we reimagine where art can be exhibited is important, because we really, I think today, coming to understand, as we've been forced to focus on excisions and censorship and erasure, what institutions, what walls, what messaging comes in all forms and all kinds, and how critical these narratives are, right, for defining who we are and who counts and who belongs. So it's institutions, it's the formal ones we know, but it's also those in-between spaces, right, where you don't quite realize you're getting a message, but you are, you know. It's in these office spaces that you don't quite always think about as critical and primary. We could have a whole class on that. I had some like designing on my mind right now. I have to say there's just a power in this room. There's a sense of community and fellowship. That's one of the pillars I know that we've created here tonight. And like Yara, I think the timing of this couldn't be more aligned with what we need to continue to move forward. I know we couldn't have any of this happen without the colleagues here at the Carpenter Center, at the Hutchins Center, Abby Wolf, Justin, Kingsley, many of those who are behind the scenes working to allow this to take place. But before we close, I would like to leave us with that affirmation, I think, from Mary. Have you had some time to think about what you want to give us?
Yeah, it was rather easy. So the affirmation is, I am a divine being.
I love this. I love this.
Right?
Yeah.
You want us to repeat that back? Is that what? Everyone must? Okay. And it's a non-religious, so we can. This is about spirit. Yeah.
All right, I'll say it again. Y'all can repeat after me. I am a divine being.
I am a divine being.
You indeed are. We all are. Thank you so much for the gift.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.